Hello, and welcome to the Circle of Divine Tarot, a series of recordings that's going to introduce you in a fun and informative way about tarot and using it as a form of divination. My name is Nina Ashby, and along with my colleague,
Ajose,
we're going to take you on a journey. Right?
Yep, and that's what the tarot essentially is about.
Indeed.
It is about the journey of life and the many different, if you want to say, signposts or stops that we interact and interface with during that journey. I would like to say how I personally got into the tarot. A program used to come on the TV called Tales of Unexpected, and at the beginning there was this round thing that was spinning around and it had these tarot cards on them. And I recall at around age 7, 8, I asked my mum, I said, what are those cards? Because I remember one of the cards that was amongst them was the death card, and she said, oh, it was, she said, oh, the tarot cards, and they're used for reading, for telling the future. So that was kind of like my first introduction, if you want to say, to the tarot. And then later on in life, when I sort of like started to go through what was I would say a life-changing path or point in life where, I really started to get more into the esoteric, was looking for more meaning in life, was looking for answers. I came across the tarot. And I recall one of my friends on my 21st birthday bought me a pack of tarot cards, and he said, oh, these are great. He goes, you need to really get into this. And I was like, oh, okay. And I had a look at them, and I kind of put them down for a good while. They were sitting there for about 6 months. I didn't actually even touch them or read them. And then something just prompted me one day to pick them up and use them and ask a question. I read the book. It was a very basic book, and I just started from there. Here I am now. This is pretty much what I do. It's a part of my counseling skills. I use it with clients on a day-to-day basis.
Let me tell you the story about my introduction to the world of tarot. I think I started a bit later.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I was living in New York City and obsessed with everything spiritual and metaphysical that I first came across tarot. So that's when I had my first tarot reading from somebody, and I thought, wow, that's amazing. And I love those images, and something really resonated for me. At the time, I was studying astrology and numerology, and I had already studied color healing and energy transmission, and things were starting to move in that direction. So the tarot combined in terms of its imagery. I was also a professional artist, so talking about images, talking about numerology, which is part of the concept of the system of tarot, and astrology, of which there are very strong links to the tarot system of divination. So somebody gave me my first deck, which is often how people begin. And I put them by my bed, and I decided, well, I'm going to be systematic about this. But I didn't do it kind of card by card. What I did was I just chose a card for the day.
For the day,
and looked it up in the little booklet and meditated on it, because I was already meditating at that time. And kind of really looked at the image, absorbed that image, tried to kind of relate it. And at the end of the day, I kept a little journal, and I said how I felt that the card that I chose related to things that happened in my day. And so I built up kind of a personal vocabulary with the cards before I did any other formal study. I just want to say that tarot is a very specific system. It was devised as a system not only to reflect the universe, the world, from the macro or the large perspective down to the micro, to the individual thing. Because everything is connected. Now, the Minor Arcana has these 4 elements, so air, earth, fire, and water. And all of the Minor Arcana cards are reflections of the outer world. So they represent, in a tarot system, people and situations that are around the person who asks the question. The Major Arcana is a much more psycho-spiritual approach to that individual. And it is the journey of the Fool, from, the young person going out into the world to the world, basically, and everything in between. And that's the deep esoteric teaching that's connected to Kabbalah, etc. And we will be talking about that a little bit more detail today. But just to say that the Minor Arcana has numbers connected to it, as well as face cards, people cards. So equivalent of Jack and Queen and King, okay? But they have 4. They've got Page, and they've got the Knight, and the Queen and the King. So those are also 4 stages of growth and development in terms of people that you would see around them, and they would describe literally people in terms of their age, in terms of their physiognomy, or how, the color of their skin, the color of their eyes, relatively, even ethnically, you can divide that too. So you can get a tremendous amount of detail from any deck of cards that you use. And what we're going to just have a little chat about now is the fact that there are so many decks of tarot cards.
Yes, they are.
I mean, originally they were the Marseille pack was the first pack.
Yeah, that was the one of the most original and popular ones.
And they developed through kind of southern France, Italy, Tarocca, and in the medieval time period, the gypsy decks based on tarot were the ones that were around. And then in the West, so we have Morgan Greer. That was kind of most connected to that. And then at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century was the beginning of a huge hermetic tradition through theosophy, through the Golden Dawn, through magical exploration, through looking at energy and looking into the past. And tarot existed through then, mostly kind of through, just became associated with the gypsies, the Romanes, who went through Europe using them for fortune telling, which wasn't really kind of how they were exactly intended originally, but kind of made there. And we'll talk about the difference between divination and fortune telling in a little while, which is quite an important distinction. Not that one is or the other is bad, they're just a different approach to things and a different philosophy behind it. But coming back to the Golden Dawn, of course, they did a huge amount of esoteric study, and they drew from many cultural references, like Egypt, like through Christianity, Judaism, through old magical traditions, including Wicca, pagan things. And they devised, along with their esoteric research, with an artist called Pamela Coleman Smith, this deck called the Rider-Waite pack. And for any beginner tarot student in the UK and in the US, they mostly use this particular deck. Because all of the research encompassed numerology, it encompassed all the proper color symbolism, all the color symbolism for each of the major and minor arcana cards, and the imagery was very carefully thought out. So most modern decks use the Rider-Waite symbolism or a variation thereof. And some decks, this is the Celtic, and it uses a more, or the Druid deck, and it uses more pagan kind of symbolism in its imagery, but you can see that Here is the Empress card in the Rider-Waite, and here it is in the more pagan Druid one. It's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Here is the Mythic Tarot, which is based on Greek mythology and uses the stories that are told in Greek mythology to express the symbolic structure of tarot that's embodied in it. And you can see that the image is pretty similar. This is Hanson Roberts, again a pretty little version of Rider-Waite. And then we come on more modern decks such as the Starseed, this is the Empress card. They don't call it the Empress, but they call it Abundance. And it has the same meaning, but with a slightly different twist to it. So each of these different decks of cards will have a different philosophical underpinning, but the basics of what tarot is, the journey of the Fool in the Major Arcana, and the outer worldly reflection within the structure of the elements, the numbers, the colors, and the pathway in each of these elements will be exactly the same. And that's the science of tarot.
And each designer or person, because up until probably around the 60s, 70s perhaps, the Rider-Waite was the most common of all the tarot decks, as Nina has quietly put. And but then in the 70s, then there was this huge, you can say, opening or explosion of different designers and who started to design their own tarot cards and different tarot decks, and that really it really started to really flourish in the late 70s, 80s, coming through to the 90s, and still even now there's still people out there still today who are still designing new tarot cards. So the designer as well, because it's imagery based, and image is somewhat very strongly linked with imagination, it's linked with the abstract world, the person who is designing the cards also can perhaps add different symbolisms too, even though each card has its core meaning and the foundation of each card is the same, they can input certain things. They may, maybe it could be a picture of an animal or a particular color, or how it could be the shading of a card that could add particular expressions to the card. So when the tarot card is interpreting it, it reflects what the client has come about. And this is also another a very interesting key, as Nina quoted earlier on. She said it's about reflection, about it's the macrocosm and the microcosm, and it's about the reflection of the inner world and the outer world. Because very often people often ask me, they say, oh well, isn't it just by chance? How can you give somebody advice based on a few cards that somebody has picked? And it's based on that, the idea that there is no such thing as chance. And that when a client comes or a person shuffles the cards and asks a particular question and pulls out a card, that card is reflective of where that person is at that moment in time in their life. So it's reflecting where they are, who's around them, the energies around them, and the possibilities and the potential for the future of outcomes also as well. So it's all depending, nothing is set in stone. It's letting you know where you are at, where your heart, mind, body, spirit is at a particular time, at that moment when you pick the card. So everything is all reflective based on where you're at, and nothing is a coincidence, nothing is based on chance.
When people shuffle the cards, what happens is they're getting their energy shuffled. So it's like, I say it's like stirring a pot and allowing things to rise, the bubbles to rise to the top that need to be visible. So by shuffling the cards, you're stirring, and by cutting the cards, what happened, or selecting an individual card, you are actually bringing to the surface that which has been stirred up electromagnetically within your psyche. And the way that we store it, everybody stores information, is through thought forms. Thought forms are a thought or a word or phrase that is associated with a set of forms or images. Structure of the cards. Let's talk about in a very general way, a reading.
Yeah.
Because you can do a reading selecting a card, that one card,
Yeah.
or you can have a series of cards and make it quite complex
Yes.
in time and space.
Yeah.
So the thing is, that's kind of built into questions. So
Yeah.
learning how to actually ask questions that are relevant to getting good information from your tarot
Yeah.
is part of the art of being a good reader for yourself and for others. Because if your question and how you ask the question is unclear,
Yes.
then what you get will be
It will
very
come up.
unclear.
That's right.
Number one. Number two, the thing that I have the hardest time teaching students for tarot is, and other forms of divination, is when you ask a question, it shouldn't be a yes-no question.
Yeah.
It needs to be a description around things,
Yeah.
and one thing at a time, rather than like a whole or a general overarching question
Yeah.
that will give you this mix, because it is a visual kind of discipline. You can get extract a huge amount of information, but you have to stick to your question, because otherwise you can go in a million directions, maybe this, maybe that,
Yeah.
oh maybe it's this, and I say
Yeah.
no, this was your question.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And sometimes you get people, not purposely, I think sometimes it's just unconscious, they're not realizing that they're asking a question, but it's like
Not
two
really the
questions
question.
and it's they're trying a little bit elusive with it, and sometimes over the years I've got to learn that. I'm not saying they're doing it intentionally, but it's almost like they're asking a question, but really they're asking something else, or they mean something else. So again, I think what Nina is also saying is that it's important to have a clear, clear your mind and know that this is what I'm asking for. This is my question. This is what it's about.
But based on that, also, a lot
Yeah.
of clients who we get, the reason they're coming is they're not clear.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so part of that process that we as professional readers have to kind of dig a little bit and say, okay, well, are you asking this, or do you really want to know about that?
Yeah.
Because this is also coming up
Yeah.
in the imagery that's there. So, when you start out giving readings, it's quite much more simplistic.
Yeah.
And then the more you have knowledge in the background of your mind, and then connect to that other individual energetically, things start happening.
Looking on the Major Arcana, it consists of 22 cards, and the Major Arcana essentially is associated with the Fool's Journey. And the first card in the Major Arcana is what's known as the Fool. And essentially, the Fool essentially is us. As human beings, or the person who's coming to have a reading, that's what the Fool essentially represents. Because there's something about a naivety, or something about the unknown, or something about a newness, a youngness, a youthful kind of energy, one could kind of say, about us, that we're naive to certain things. There's certain things in this universe, or many things in this universe, that we are not aware of or we don't know. And the story is that we are going through the journey of life not knowing certain things, and we may rush into things, we may go into things unknowingly, not knowing what we're getting ourselves into, or why, or how, and essentially the Fool is showing us that this is a journey at the start of life, the beginning of life. This is an aspect that we all possess, or we all have in various areas of our life. So the 22 tarot cards of the Major Arcana essentially is depicting the journey of the Fool, and each card after the first one, after the Fool card, is essentially showing us a particular stage of development of the Fool's journey. So when somebody comes for a reading, for example, and a particular card is picked, based on a particular context. It's showing us a particular stage of development and the characteristic and the essence and the ingredients of the stage of where that particular person is at that particular moment. Very often, the most famous, I was speaking about earlier on when I first got into the tarot. I first saw my tarot cards on this program called Tales of the Unexpected, where there was this thing going round, and one of the cards that was on there was the Death card. The Death card is very often very, very popular. People